G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with another YouTube Sculptors Guild movie. This one's inspired by Loreleila, Family Sculptures. Here we have a bit of a motley collection of objects. In the foreground we have my grandfather's walking stick handle, which I inherited when I was 3 years old. It's actually 1.5. I inherited this one. I couldn't talk, but I knew who he was, and his favourite trick was to open the mouth of the bulldog, going hoo 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 hoo, with the bulldog in my face. So when I was in a pram in the main street being wheeled by my maternal grandparents, and I saw my paternal grandfather, I sat up in the pram, pointed at him and made the ho 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 noise as best as a baby could do, and thus I introduced my grandparents to each other. It's been served with black and white cotton to reinforce the Malacca cane, which my father cut on a holiday to the Barrier Reef when he was a young man in about, I think 1929 or so. And it used to have probably an English oak stick, but it was a bit too short for me, and in an argument with a goose I fell over and broke the stick. So I went and got a gun and shot the goose. So that's my grandfather's bit of woodwork, I think. I gave let's come out into the sun. I gave it an araldite eyeball to replace the missing glass one, and I had to start using this seriously in 1992 after breaking my right ankle crashing the aeroplane. Okay, so that's my grandfather's sculptural woodwork. Now we'll skip over the other stick for a bit and we'll come to this pair of interesting little curios. They're called scribing blocks, okay, and you use them in lathe work, and this one is the original as bought from the manufacturer. And in the 1930s my father was invited to teach metalwork at the Glen Innes Technical College, as they called it, right? So he'd sort of started work in a blacksmith shop and pulled a Model A Ford to pieces, and it ran 3 times after 3 pullings down. So they put up a sign, all automotive repairs. So the first exercise, he said, his class was to make a scribing block. And this is the one he made as a demonstration for him. And as you can see, it's made out of a bit of scrappy old metal, which he's had to weld up to fill the dings in it. But I reckon that's pretty much the epitome of functional sculpture, except for what I'm going to show you next. In 1976, my father decided that he wanted a solid brass lock with brass insides for the boat shed at his holiday house at the coast. And when you buy a brass lock in modern times, they've actually got steel insides to them, so they go rusty. He said he knew where there was a solid brass lock. Trouble is, the key had gone missing in 1936. And I watched him while he made that from memory. Okay? And the very first time he put the key into the lock, the damn thing worked. Alright? Going to be very difficult to do. Hold fire for a sec. It's the sort of thing where you have to maintain tension on the lock to get it to open. Right? When he was a kid, my son used to sit there for hours working this lock, trying to channel the grandfather that he never met, because the old man died 7 years before my first kid was born. But I reckon that's a pretty good bit of sculpture to make that key from memory and have it work 40 years later. in a solid brass lock. So we move on to this stuff here. When I was a kid, I don't know, maybe 1967 or 68, we went on a holiday, towing a caravan, and we went as far west as we could get. And the old man stopped at one point and made us sit there in the sun while he went over and used his axe to cut this bit of wood, and also the bit that this came from. And this one is leopard wood, and the other one is iron wood or waddy wood. And it's the second hardest, densest wood in creation. So he never got well around to making the walking stick that he said it was going to be good for, and when he'd been dead for 20 years I decided it must be probably my job. So these are the offcuts from the original bit of iron wood. This is the offcuts from the original bit of leopard wood, and this is what I made from it. There's a grey fantail for a handle, and the beak kept breaking off. I'll turn it round so you can see there's a red-bellied black snake which winds its way completely around, carved in the bark, and there's this broad-striped brown-tailed gecko which you could actually, before some of them broke off, there's a high relief there where you can go underneath the bum of the lizard and you can go underneath the toes of the lizard. I used a Dremel to get in there, but of course part of one foot's broken off, and that's why I'm particularly happy that I've got some relics of the wood. Is I'm going to have to get down there and wear a jeweler's loop and make up new pieces and glue them in. I've got to glue the bird back on because it fell over at a party. Strangely, it was a party that my father would not have wanted me or my daughter to go to, because it was a birthday party for my cousins from Emerville, and Dad had an argument with his cousin in Emerville back in 1948, and the two halves of the family have never spoken to one another, and I think my father's ghost and George Stark's ghost must have been arguing that I broke my walking stick and my daughter tore the fly screen door off the house by accident. Old local effect. Now here we have the iron wood joining a diamond shaped splice of leopard wood, and down the bottom there the leopard wood goes into a length of iron bark. Right, and I carved it into an octagon like a rifle shape, and you can just see the dowels of iron wood. Here's one of the dowels, the offcuts which I plan on using to repair this. It'll go straight down in through the joint, and here's a piece cut off the end of the iron bark tip piece, and this is the central wedge which came out of there in order to fit the splice, and it's tied up with sticky tape because when I had a home invasion I swung it at the home invader's head, and then I pulled the punch and swung it round and aimed for his leg at the very last minute, and instead of hitting him in the leg I broke my stick on the rock under his foot. And that was a day I learned that violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. So, family sculptures. We have my grandfather's walking stick that I use at the moment because I haven't got around to fixing the walking stick that I made. We have the 2 scribing blocks and the Edwards 8-lever lock and key. And that's my take on functional sculptures. And in fact, there's my father in 1919 when he was 10 years old looking at his father fixing a wagon wheel. And that lock and the key, they're actually closing the gate that's behind them in the background of that photograph. How's that for authenticity, huh? Ciao.